There is a war happening inside your head right now, not a dramatic war with explosions and heroes, a quiet, grinding, exhausting war. The kind where you replay a conversation from 3 days ago and rehearse what you should have said. The kind where you stare at a blank page, a decision, a message you haven't sent, and your mind runs 40 simulations of everything that could go wrong. The kind where you wake up in the morning already tired, already behind, already lost in the noise before you've even stood up. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are trapped. Trapped inside the relentless machinery of a mind that was never taught how to stop. And the worst part, the more you try to think your way out of it, the deeper you sink. Every analysis creates more questions. Every question creates more anxiety. And the one thing that could break you free, action, feels more and more impossible with every passing second. This is overthinking. And it is not a modern problem. It is a human problem, one that Miyamoto Musashi understood better than almost anyone in history, not because he read a book about it, but because he lived in a world where overthinking got you killed. Musashi was 17 years old the first time he killed a man in a duel. He went on to fight and win more than 60 such duels over his lifetime, never suffering defeat. What made him invincible was not simply physical superiority. Many of his opponents were stronger, better trained, backed by entire schools of combat. What made Musashi untouchable was his mind. Specifically, his ability to silence the noise inside it at exactly the moment when the noise was loudest. He understood something that most of us still haven't learned. The battle is not in front of you. The battle is inside you. And until you win the internal war, you cannot win anything external. His writings, collected in the Book of Five Rings, are not instructions for using a sword. They are a manual for constructing a mind that can cut through chaos without flinching. That is what this is about today. Not motivation, not a list of tricks. A fundamental rewiring of the relationship you have with your own thoughts. Let us start at the root. Why do you overthink in the first place? The comfortable answer is that you are cautious, thoughtful, intelligent. Maybe. But the honest answer is something more uncomfortable. You overthink because you are afraid. Not always of obvious things. Sometimes the fear is so buried you can't even name it. It hides inside the analysis. It disguises itself as thoroughness, as preparation, as responsibility. But strip away the words and what you find underneath is always the same thing. A terror of being wrong, of being judged, of taking a step and falling, of being seen for exactly what you are, and being found insufficient. Musashi said, "Perceive that which cannot be seen with the eyes." He was pointing at this. The surface of your overthinking is never the real problem. The real problem is what lives underneath it, in the shadows, feeding the noise. Until you turn and face what is actually driving the mental loop, you can manage the symptoms, but you cannot cure the disease. And managing symptoms is exhausting. You deserve to be cured. Here is what facing it actually looks like. Not a dramatic revelation, not a single moment of clarity that changes everything. It looks like sitting quietly, without a phone, without music, without any escape from yourself, and asking one question. What am I actually afraid of here? Not what could go wrong logically. What am I afraid of? Emotionally, in my body, in my gut. The mind will resist this. It will immediately offer you 10 logical problems to solve instead of letting you sit with the emotional one. This is the trick. The mind uses logic to hide from feeling. Musashi trained for years to see through this trick. He learned that the mind which cannot be still cannot be trusted, not because it is broken, but because it is running. And a running mind is always running from something. When you find what yours is running from, and you sit with it, something unexpected happens. It gets smaller, not immediately, not completely, but smaller, because the thing you feared was feeding off the distance. Every time you ran, it grew. When you stop running and turn around, you discover it was never as large as it felt from behind. Now we move to the second layer. Once you have begun to face the fear beneath the thinking, you encounter the next trap. The belief that there is one perfect path, one right answer, one correct decision that you simply haven't found yet, and that your job is to keep thinking until you find it. This belief is catastrophic. It is the engine of paralysis. It converts every decision into an unsolvable equation. because what you are really searching for is not a solution. You are searching for certainty, and certainty does not exist. Musashi wrote, "There is more than one path to the top of the mountain." He was not offering comfort. He was delivering a blade to the throat of perfectionism. He won 60 duels with 60 different approaches. He never used the same weapon twice in his early years. He adapted to each opponent, each environment, each moment. He understood that rigidity was death. The warrior who can only fight one way will eventually meet the opponent who breaks that way. The person who can only make decisions when all variables are controlled will eventually freeze at the most critical moment, because in life, the variables are never controlled. What this means practically is that the search for the perfect answer must end. Not because perfect answers don't exist, but because waiting for them costs more than the imperfect ones would. Think about every decision you have delayed waiting for more information, more certainty, more clarity. Now think about what that delay actually cost you, not in terms of what went wrong, but in terms of what never happened. Because here is the truth that overthinking hides from you. Most of the damage it causes is invisible. It is the idea that was never started, the conversation that was never had, the risk that was never taken, the version of yourself that was never built because you were too busy analyzing whether it was safe to begin. Musashi would call this the greatest defeat of all. Not failing at something you attempted, never attempting it at all. You can recover from failure. You cannot recover from a life spent standing at the edge, planning to jump. The third layer is where the transformation becomes physical, and this is the part that most people miss, because they treat overthinking as a mental problem that requires a mental solution. More thinking, better thinking, a different kind of thinking. But Musashi understood that the mind and the body are not separate systems. They are one system. When the mind is overloaded, the body reflects it. The shoulders tighten, the breath becomes shallow, the jaw locks, the chest contracts. And then here is the brutal irony. Those physical states of tension feed signals back to the brain that amplify anxiety. The body that is bracing for impact tells the brain there is something to brace for, and the brain generates more thoughts to justify the tension. The cycle is self-sustaining, and you cannot break it purely from inside the head. You have to interrupt it at the physical level first. Musashi used breath as a weapon in his duels. Before engaging, he would settle his breathing, slow it deliberately, deepen it, make it rhythmic. He understood that a man whose breath was calm was a man whose mind was clear, and a man whose breath was ragged was already defeated before the sword was drawn. This is not mysticism. This is neuroscience. When you breathe slowly and deeply, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the system that signals safety to the body, the one that tells the brain it can stop producing cortisol and start thinking clearly. 4 seconds in through the nose, hold, 6 seconds out through the mouth. One cycle. That is all you need to begin shifting the state. Not eliminating the thoughts, not solving the problem. Simply changing the physical environment in which the thoughts are being generated. When the body stops bracing, the mind begins to release, and in that release, something opens. Not solutions necessarily, but space. And space is what overthinking eliminates. It floods every gap with noise, so you cannot hear what you actually know. When you breathe, you create a gap, and in that gap, clarity begins to form. Now we come to the fourth and most powerful layer. Purpose. Musashi wrote, "Do nothing which is of no use." This is the cruelest sentence he ever produced for the overthinker, because when you examine the contents of most mental spirals honestly, you discover something shocking. Almost none of it is useful. Not in the sense that it could not theoretically be justified as preparation or planning, but in the sense that it is not moving you anywhere. It is spinning. Spinning generates heat but no momentum. It consumes fuel without producing distance. The overthinker is not thinking about how to solve the problem. They are thinking about the problem in order to avoid having to make the decision about the problem. The thinking is not preparation for action. The thinking is a substitute for action. And this substitution feels safe because while you are thinking, you cannot fail, but you also cannot succeed. You are frozen in the amber of your own analysis. The practice Musashi proposes as an antidote is ruthless simplicity of intention. Before any significant moment, He would reduce his objective to a single clear sentence, not a strategy. A sentence. What am I actually trying to accomplish here? Not all the things that could happen, not all the variables to consider. What am I trying to accomplish? That sentence becomes an anchor. When the mind drifts into the spiral, the anchor pulls it back. When the thoughts multiply and collapse into noise, the anchor gives you something to hold. I am trying to have an honest conversation. I am trying to finish this chapter. I am trying to make the decision and move. One sentence. Simple enough to remember when everything feels complicated. Specific enough to measure whether what you are doing is actually serving it. When you apply this, you will notice that most of what your mind was generating was not serving the purpose at all. It was serving the fear. And once you can see the difference, you can begin to choose which one you feed. The final piece is the one nobody wants to hear. You cannot eliminate overthinking, not permanently, not completely. It will come back. The voice will return. The spiral will start again. Musashi never claimed to have permanently conquered fear or doubt. He claimed to have trained the ability to act in spite of them. That is the actual goal, not a quiet mind. A mind that can move even when it is loud. Because the world does not pause for your internal weather. It continues, and the only question that matters is whether you are continuing with it, or whether you are standing still, waiting for perfect conditions that will never arrive. Every day that you practice moving despite the noise loses power. Not because it disappears, but because its ability to stop you diminishes. You build what Musashi called the way, not a technique, a nature, a way of being in which the default response to uncertainty is action rather than analysis, in which the fear is acknowledged and then set aside, not because it is dismissed, but because something else, purpose, has been chosen over it. This requires daily practice, not heroic practice, not dramatic discipline. The kind Musashi described as ordinary, relentless, patient. 10 minutes of stillness in the morning before the noise begins. 1 breath before the meeting, the message, the decision. 1 question before engaging. What am I actually trying to do here? These are not impressive rituals. They are unremarkable. They feel almost too small to matter. But Musashi spent years in a cave doing unremarkable things and emerged as someone who could not be defeated. He understood what you are beginning to understand now. Mastery is not a moment. It is an accumulation of ordinary moments done with full attention. The mind that cannot stop thinking is not broken. It is untrained. And the difference between untrained and trained is not talent or intelligence. It is the willingness to show up every day and do the small, unglamorous work of becoming the person who does not flinch. You are not too far gone. You are not irreparably caught in the spiral. You are simply at the beginning of a practice that the greatest warriors in history had to begin somewhere too. Musashi's first duel ended in victory, but it did not end his fear. It gave him evidence that he could act despite the fear. That is all you need. 1 act. 1 decision made not from certainty but from intention. 1 moment where you breathe, reduce the noise to a single sentence, and move. Because every single time you do that, you train a deeper version of yourself. One that becomes, over time, genuinely difficult to stop. Not loud, not dramatic, just relentlessly, quietly, unstoppably in motion. That is the antidote to overthinking. Not a calm mind, a moving one. And you already have everything you need to begin. You have always had it. The only question left is whether today is the day you decide to use it. If you made it to the end of this and something landed differently than you expected, if something felt less like information and more like recognition, then leave a single word in the comments. Not for the algorithm, for yourself. A marker that says you were here, that you heard it, and that you are choosing to move. Because you are not looking for motivation. You are looking for the permission to stop waiting. Consider this that permission. The war is already over. It ended the moment you decided to stop running from your own mind and start training it. What comes next is just practice.